Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 31 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. I had such a great discussion with Bridget Hughes and Lizzie McAdam of the Hetrick-Martin Institute for this episode. We talked about LGBTQ youth and grief. I'm so glad we covered this topic for a couple of reasons. First, because there are some unique issues for parents to be aware of in case they have an LGBTQ teen who's grieving. And second, because having a kid come out can feel like unfamiliar territory, like a whole new challenge for the surviving parent to handle alone without their parenting partner. It can feel overwhelming to figure out how to support your kid when you're already dealing with so much on your own. Bridget and Lizzie and I talked about so many things, including the importance of identity development during the teen years and how losing a parent affects that, what other types of losses LGBTQ youth face that are important for parents to understand, mental health issues that LGBTQ youth are more at risk for, how LGBTQ youth are more at risk for social isolation, challenges in coming out to straight peers and navigating social environments such as school, camps, sports, and other youth activities that may tend to be sex segregated, how social or family pressure to live a heteronormative lifestyle can affect LGBTQ youth, ways the LGBTQ community has developed over time to deal with community-level grief, the importance of LGBTQ youth getting support from other members of the community, and where parents can find support for themselves in understanding and supporting their LGBTQ teens. I hope you enjoy my discussion with Bridget Hughes and Lizzie McAdam. My guests today are Bridget Hughes, who's the Chief Program Officer at the Hetrick-Martin Institute, and Lizzie McAdam, who is the Assistant Director of Counseling at HMI. And they are joining us from their office in New York City. Lizzie and Bridget, welcome.
Thanks. We're happy to be here.
Yeah, so I invited you guys to the podcast this week to talk about LGBTQ youth and grief. And I have to say, I didn't even realize that this might be a topic for the podcast, that there might be any different issues or different considerations related to grief for LGBTQ youth than for any other youth who are grieving. But then I heard you give a webinar for the National Alliance for Grieving Children. And I realized that this would be a really important discussion to have here on the podcast. And I know that it will be useful for some of my listeners. So you guys are with the Hetrick-Martin Institute. And I know, Bridget, you also have a long history with other LGBTQ organizations and programs and the New York City Department of Education and the National Institute of Mental Health, a whole bunch of other things. So I'm so glad you both are here today. And so let me ask, first of all, so what is the Hetrick-Martin Institute, and what do you guys do?
Great. Well, the Hetrick-Martin Institute was founded back in 1979, so we've been around for 40 years and are celebrating our 40th anniversary this year, serving LGBT youth between the ages of 13 and 24. HMI's programs for young people range between, sort of crisis intervention, counseling, and case management services, as well as health and wellness, academic programs to help young people get jobs, and arts and culture programs to help young people connect to community and one another, as well as we have an ongoing partnership with Harvey Milk High School, which is a transfer high school within the Department of Education here in New York City.
Okay, cool. And I think that you guys also partner with New York Life, right?
Yeah, we are really excited to be a partner with the New York Life Foundation and have been working on a project that would have national scope in terms of both training bereavement counselors around LGBT communities, particularly young people, and how to make sure that they're included and served. And then also to be doing work within the LGBT youth serving community to make sure that there's some capacity to deal with bereavement for folks who work primarily with LGBTQ youth. So we've been looking at what HMI has done, because we've always supported young people through our counseling programs and our after-school programs, et cetera, around grief and loss, and sort of looking at how, the different ways that we've been able to do that successfully, and how can we turn that into something, information that can be useful to other providers.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay. Listeners may have noticed that New York Life has come up a few times in the recent episodes. They're involved in many childhood grief related things. So this is fantastic, and I'm glad you guys have hooked up with them. So let's just start out with a little bit of terminology here, just so that we can all be on the same page. And because I think that the terminology and even the acronyms have shifted somewhat over time. Correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like the first acronym I heard, and this would have been way back in the early 90s when I was in college, was GLBT, and now, of course, you hear those letters flipped, it's LGBTQ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the beautiful things about the LGBTQ plus community is that our language is very important to us, and it's also constantly parts of it are shifting and changing, just like language does,
Sure.
Overall. And so LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning youth. Sometimes you'll also hear an IA at the end of that, which can stand for a couple of other things, including intersex and allies, and there are a few more. I know the Q can also be questioning as well. So really these are there are so many different variations of how LGBTQ people can look, and so I think we're adding letters as a way to try to encompass this sort of large umbrella that is the larger LGBTQ community, sort of as we go.
I would also add, that at this point, I was on the subway yesterday, and I saw a poster from the Unity Project where it was a parent that says, "I love my LGBT child," and there was a picture of a mom and a kid, and I was like, well, no one person is LGBT, so but so it's looking like LGBTQ or LGBT has moved into the vernacular as an umbrella term for folks whose sexual orientation and gender identity may be outside of the heterosexual cisgender box, right? So a lot of the young people that we work with identify as pansexual, like that their sexual orientation exists on across a spectrum, and
they're attracted to people of many genders,
right? And they rather than being strictly transgender, we've got lots of kids who identify as gender expansive, gender nonconforming, and gender liberated. So we raise the umbrella of LGBTQ and know that that's not the end of the story. Like there's a lot underneath it.
Okay. And some other good terms came up in what you guys were just mentioning. So you mentioned cisgender. So what does that mean?
Cisgender means that the gender that a person was assigned at birth. So, for example, I'm a cisgendered woman. I was assigned female at birth, and that aligns with my gender identity and expression today. So it sort of matches who I've become. So cisgender, as opposed to someone who identifies as transgender or gender non-binary. Transgender would mean that the gender that you were assigned at birth does not match your gender as you sort of feel it now. And gender non-binary or gender queer, gender questioning would reflect somebody who is trying to move away from the binary of, male on one end, female on the other, and that there are only two options. So within the community, we have quite a lot of people who are working to sort of break out of that one choice or the other and say that there are multiple ways to be gendered and perform gender in the world.
Gotcha. Okay. And bi is short for bisexual, and trans is short for transgender. And a trans man, for example, then is who? And a trans woman is who?
A trans man would be someone who was assigned female at birth and now identifies as male. and a trans woman would be somebody who is assigned male at birth and now identifies as a female. Gotcha.
Okay. Thank you for getting us all on the same page here. I think there's a lot of different terms for somebody who may be newer into this area to learn. So thank you for helping us out with that. Let's just jump right in with some grief-related questions then here. I was thinking about a few different scenarios that might be different. Well, I'm curious if you think they would be different. Basically, what I'm trying to say is if you have a teenager and who a parent has died, I'm wondering if there might be different issues or things that might come up depending on when this teenager has come out as gay. Well, let me ask you: is that an okay use of that term as an umbrella, or should I be saying LGBTQ?
I think many people sometimes use the word gay as a general umbrella term. So I don't object to that. Or you can also say LGBTQ to sort of make it a little bit broader.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I don't want to mess up my terminology now that we just went through all that. So let's take a scenario here. Let's say you have a teenager who's in high school, maybe they already have come out as LGBTQ, and then their parent dies. Mm-hmm. What kind of maybe particular issues or challenges do you think might they struggle with or might come up in that kind of situation?
I think we were just talking about this yesterday about how the sort of identity development is something that's like sort of an unavoidable part of what adolescence is. So that even something as huge as losing a parent is not an event that's going to stop identity development, right? Mm-hmm. So a young person who's come out to their parents or and they're and then lost that parent, the quality of their relationship in terms of its ability to sort of move with that, and what was the level of acceptance and how much were they able to share and talk about it, how much did they go through together or not go through together, are going to be things that are an ongoing big salient part of what this teenager's going to be holding. Mm. I think the really important thing to realize is that gender identity and sexual orientations are huge core aspects of self. And so at whatever degree that we're able to, young people are able to share that with their parents is a big deal. And whatever way that they're not able to share that with their parent because the parent's no longer there is also a huge deal.
Mm. So that then makes me think of another scenario where maybe you have a child who was very, very young when their parent died. Maybe they were a baby, or maybe they were, early childhood. At that point, did not have a developing LGBTQ identity. But then later, sometime in the teenage years, that does emerge. And now the parent has died before that could be known to them, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I would say too that this sort of relates to a larger topic of like as you're thinking about who you are in the world and thinking about what to share with your parents or not, that I imagine losing a parent, if it happens when you're older, losing a parent and knowing that you've held on to something or some piece of yourself that you didn't get a chance to tell them about, maybe something that the child might be holding on to or wondering about, how would my parent that I've lost have reacted to this? Would they have been the person who would have supported me through this? Or would they have had taken issue with this part of me or somehow not accepted me? That's, I imagine, one of the bigger questions that young people are holding. And I think, if the child has gone through a process of coming out and, and they may be in the process of coming to terms and thinking about and understanding their gender or their sexual orientation starting from a very young age. And it, sometimes it takes a while to actually come out and start sharing that with family members. And sometimes that starts, at a much younger age. But regardless of that process, I think for LGBTQ young people, there is this question of how would the parent I've lost have reacted to this information, and that's as unique as that child's relationship with that parent. Depending on how close or how strained the relationship was, or a lot of different factors.
Yeah, and that then becomes a question that they never really can get an answer to, because that person did die before they had a chance to talk about it for whatever reason.
Right. So I imagine just like other things that they may be wondering about, outside of gender or sexual orientation, that this is another piece that for that child that they will have to spend some time thinking about and processing that with, hopefully within a supportive community.
Okay. All right. So then I'm thinking about how do, well, let me ask first, are there some things that LGBTQ youth might be more vulnerable to in terms of mental health or physical health issues that the surviving parent should be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, so in general, LGBTQ youth are disproportionately affected by certain mental health issues, particularly anxiety and depression. They're more likely to experience bullying or feeling like they are sort of rejected from different spaces because of who they are. That could be within their family of origin, that could be at school, that could be with peer groups. It could be a variety of places. So, due to the sort of higher risk in general for those things, I think it's all the more important really for LGBTQ young people to have a supportive environment where they're able to talk with somebody who is safe about who they are, about who they're becoming, about all of these different pieces that they may have. And so, for parents who, particularly surviving parents who are looking to support their LGBTQ youth, there are lots of good resources out there for parents, which I know we'll talk about sort of a little bit later, but there are lots of good resources and ways for you to educate yourself and in finding those spaces and helping to create that space for your child. And also there are lots of good spaces and communities that you can help direct your child to so that they also can have a place where they can be surrounded by other LGBTQ young people and adults and people who are affirming sort of who they are, who they're becoming, and give them support as well from within the community.
Okay, good. Yeah, and I definitely do want to get to some of those resources towards the end here. So that'll be good. So I'm thinking back to what you said, and I think one thing I took out of it is that if you have a teen who's LGBTQ, they may be more at risk for things like anxiety and depression. And then also if you have a teen who's grieving because their parent died, they may be more at risk for those things as well. So there's basically some things that sounds like should be on the parent's radar screen to look out for, just to kind of be aware that they might, keep an eye on that and see if they might be developing any of those issues.
Yeah, and I think in particular as it relates to their gender identity or their sexual orientation, that it's also about helping to decrease the feelings of isolation that the child might be going through. And so the more connected that they can feel to community, finding other people who they feel like they can relate to, and talk specifically around their coming out process or around their gender identity or sexual orientation, that will be very helpful to them.
So let's talk about that a little bit. You mentioned the potential sense of isolation. Can you talk a little bit about like why is that an issue or a struggle for LGBTQ youth? Like what have you seen? In what ways do people potentially become more isolated?
I mean, I think it's so I'll give you an example of a young person that I'm currently working with, and they've had actually a very positive coming out experience. They came out to their family as lesbian when they were 13, and she was being raised by a single mom who was very supportive. But the school that she was attending didn't have a very large out population, meaning a LGBTQ community of peers who had all come out and were actively talking about that experience of being out. And so she really struggled with, should I talk to my friends about this? Should I let them know that I now identify as lesbian? She was worried about being rejected from her friend group as a result. And she, in general, was looking for somebody who she would be able to talk more about. So, part of the work that we did together, and so part of the help for her came in the form of coming to counseling and being able to see a counselor who also identified as part of the LGBTQ community, and then also seeking out a larger community of LGBTQ young people where she could feel connected and actually speak with other young people about how did you come out to your straight friends? How did you navigate this? Let's share experiences. And being able to share and talk about those things with other peers who are a part of the community was very helpful to her in then being able to navigate that at school. And she was eventually able to come out to her friends and felt much less isolated and much less alone in her experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. And so in that example, you were talking about a school environment, and I'm wondering also, do you see people struggling or having issues as it relates to other, like, I don't know, youth sports and youth organizations and church groups and scouting and any kind of, are those potential areas of struggle too?
Absolutely. I think any space that a young person is spending time in, if they are worried about how those spaces will receive new information about their developing identity, that it's helpful for them to have a space where they can talk about how to navigate that process. And there are plenty of young people who come out to people in their lives, whether it's a church group or whether it's a peer group at school or whether it's their family members, and who are met with rejection around who they are. And, or potentially harm, right? We work with a large number of young people who are part of the LGBTQ community and who are currently homeless because after they came out to their families, they were kicked out of their houses and had to basically fend for themselves in that respect. So, wow. So there are a lot of ways in which young people are impacted, and whether it's, sort of something like, I'm just scared of how this person is going to react. I think that they're going to be fine, but I just don't know how to say it to them. Or it is a safety concern. That those are all different things that young people have to be able to navigate. And ideally, the more support that they can get navigating those spaces and learning how to do that, the better off they are, so they don't have to hold on to that fear and anxiety of coming out to other people themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Coming out is a really big job for a child and or for an adolescent. And even when it goes well, the anxiety that comes before it is a lot to shoulder.
Yeah. Well, and somebody who's in middle school or high school is probably already worried about being perceived as different in any number of things, whether it's their clothing or their hairstyle or their, I don't know, lots of things. And this is a much bigger or more consequential way to be different. So I could see how that would magnify the anxiety around that.
Right. One thing just to throw out there is that, like, Andrew Solomon has that term where he sort of talks about identity as either, some parts of our identities are vertical, meaning that we inherit them through our families somehow, or they're horizontal identities where, that occur independently from family, and LGBT identity is one of those horizontal or independently occurring identities. And so LGBTQ youth need to get support from other LGBTQ youth. Like, they can't get everything they need in terms of peer interaction or support or, role models or, sort of guidance and support from their families or from their parents. They have to seek it out elsewhere. And I think that's, while it can be scary, even for a young person to sort of reach out that way, that's something that they really need to do, and that's where they're going to get support. And that's something that often parents find threatening or frightening, is to, like, no, my kid needs something that, and is going through an experienced or, some part of their life that I don't know anything about, if the parent is heterosexual or cisgender. And so it's important to remember that those other communities, and are exactly what the young person needs, and that the good things come when young people find other young people who are experiencing the same things. Just like grieving children need to be with other grieving children, LGBT youth need to be with other LGBT youth.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's I think a really important point, and one that might not have been obvious. So thank you for sharing that. I'm thinking next here about, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about social pressures or family pressures, or just kind of I don't know, maybe you call it a default expectation of society that people would live a heteronormative lifestyle, and then how that how that affects LGBTQ youth, and maybe how that might create challenges for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I have some thoughts, and Bridget, feel free to jump in. You might have some thoughts too, but I think, in general, there is a lot of pressure from larger society. And there's usually an assumption in families that your child is going to be heterosexual and is going to be cisgendered, and that they are comfortable in both of those things. And that gets communicated, in any number of ways, from asking young children if they have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, usually the opposite sex, that gets asked. So, like, you would ask your young daughter if she has a boyfriend, or your son if he has a girlfriend, and lots of other ways in which gender also gets affirmed. Within families, we communicate that in lots of different ways, including the types of clothing we buy for our kids. That girls are supposed to wear this, boys are supposed to wear this. These are the things that are okay for girls to wear. These are the things that are okay or not okay for boys to wear. A common example is usually boys are highly discouraged from wearing makeup, from wearing dresses, from playing dress up in any way that sort of tries on femininity in a type of way. So, I think there are all of these little ways sort of add up to larger pressures throughout our lives. And so, it really sort of stacks the deck in a way that can make it very difficult for children who are feeling like, maybe I don't want to wear this type of clothing. This doesn't actually make me feel very comfortable. Or maybe I'm not interested in a member of the opposite sex. Maybe I'm interested in somebody who looks a little bit more gender queer, or I'm interested in somebody of the same sex. What do I do? How do I navigate that? So, in general, I think the more that young people are able to see models of themselves or hear about families like theirs, or relationships of lots of different kinds, not just heterosexual, not just cisgendered people, but the more that you can read books or hear stories or just be involved with people and other people within the LGBTQ community, the more that it can help to really normalize the larger LGBTQ community for kids, which in turn is, it's very helpful, I think, for all children and for all people to, to be able to be more supportive and to have close relationships with people who have lots of different gender expressions and lots of different relationships or sexual orientations. But it's particularly helpful, I think, to see that kind of normalizing happen for young people who eventually come out at some point in their childhood or later in life.
Yeah. Okay. How about the issue of religion? And I guess one of the things I'm thinking about of how it intersects with grief here, sometimes in some families, religion might play a major role in the grieving process, whether it's, you get the funeral, other things, and yet there might be, what am I trying to say? It might be then a source of struggle for the child as well. So I'm imagining there might be kind of a push and pull there or something. Can you talk a little bit about that subject?
Sure. When I think some earlier question you had asked, I was thinking about the different kinds of loss that come up when a person, even at a young age, comes out as LGBT, and one of the potential losses is loss of a faith community or loss of connection to religion if the religion is not welcoming and inclusive of LGBT people, and that comes in a context of other potential losses too, like loss of, you might have a supportive parent, but your grandparent is not supportive, or, you might have a safe and inclusive school, but you go away to a summer camp and they have very rigid sex segregated cabins and you don't know where you fit. There's that whole continuum. And I think, religion and faith communities have the potential to be really important places of connection and solace and healing for folks, particularly during mourning, and but that for an LGBTQ person, depending on the place, it might be a real place of fear and harm, and parents might not even know yet that that's that the emergent LGBT identity is there, and I think it's something to be aware of.
Okay, thank you. And then how about for LGBTQ youth of color? Are there some unique issues that people should be aware of?
I mean, by and large, LGBTQ youth of color are disproportionately affected by harm across a broad range of categories. But the LGBTQ identity is, of course, intersecting with racial identity and the ways in which racism is perpetrated in many ways throughout the society. So it's sort of a doubling up of the types of oppression that they might face. It does disproportionately impact their safety, whether that is walking down the street and interacting with police officers or with people on the street. When you look at the statistics around when hate crimes happen, trans women of color are the largest targeted group. and are being harmed and killed at much higher rates than anyone else within the LGBTQ community.
Mm.
We also know from research that, youth of color face more sort of harsh discipline in school settings. LGBTQ youth of color face even more harsh levels of punishment and discipline in schools, and are more likely to be, say, arrested at school for something that their white or non-LGBT young person would be. So those are things to be aware of. The landscape of institutional settings starts to look really different depending on your race.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about the surviving parent here. And I'm thinking about, what kind of transition or adjustment might be required of the parent if the child comes out as LGBTQ. And I guess I've heard it's sometimes compared to a grief process, maybe in and of itself. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what kind of adjustment is required, and can you help us kind of understand some issues around that?
You want to take that one, Lizzie?
Sure. So I missed it cut out for a second because it was a little bit staticky. So I missed the last part of your question, but I know you were asking about the surviving parent. Can you just repeat it?
Yeah, about the adjustment or transition required of the surviving parent, and I've heard that sometimes there is some grief in that process. I'm wondering if that's true, or if you could just talk about that transition a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think when your child comes out to you, either as transgender or gender nonconforming, or they let you know that they are not straight, that their sexual orientation is something other than heterosexual. I think there is, there's sort of a shattering of the worldview, or the expectation that happens with society is also happening right there in the microcosm of the family. So, we are all socialized to think that our kids are going to grow up to be straight and cisgender, and so when your kid comes out as not one of those two things, I think there is a process for the parent. And the parent might have concerns or thoughts around what this will mean for their kid. Most often I hear parents express worries or concerns that their kid's life is going to be harder now as a result of their identity, and they're worried about their child's safety and how they'll be received by the larger world. Or it might also be that there are other worries. I remember myself when I was coming out to my mom that she, this was many, many years ago, but she believed that meant that she was never going to get any grandchildren, because in her mind, it wasn't possible for people within the LGBTQ community to have kids, have families, and of course that's not the case. And so there are a lot of expectations, I think, that can kind of go with that, and that the parent also needs time and space to be able to process that. I think my recommendation would be for the parent to find a safe and supportive community for themselves to also process some of this, so that you're not placing that burden of processing your own feelings of feeling upset or grief or mourning the sort of loss of what you thought your child was going to be on your kid, because your child is going through their own process, and it is, it's often very difficult for kids to come out to their parents. So I think that's, just like we were saying, it's important for the child to be able to have a supportive community where they can process and think about what it means to be part of this community. I think it's also equally as important for parents to be able to have their own supportive communities, to be able to think about how this impacts their view of their child and their feelings around it. in the fullest extent without placing that burden on your child.
Yeah. So let's jump right in then to some of these practical things, because I think, in the last few minutes that we have here, where can parents find that kind of support? Are there any organizations, or where would you point them?
Well, I think the biggest place I would recommend that parents start is PFLAG, which I don't know if it still stands for this, but it used to stand for Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, I believe. Bridget, correct me but I feel like it's more euphemized now.
Yeah, Parents, Friends, and Families, but I do think it's meant to be LGBTQ at this point.
Right, exactly. It's sort of more all-encompassing.
Mm-hmm.
But PFLAG is a great resource. They have a great website that you can go to and find support groups there. There's lots of information that parents can read about, places where you can go to get your own questions answered around your child's identity and, how that will impact their life, how that's impacting your family life. So that's usually a really great starting place.
Okay. All right, great. We'll be sure and put that in the show notes. And it sounds like that would be a place where parents could then connect with other parents who either are going through similar things now, and or maybe other parents who are maybe farther down the path and can reflect back and share from that perspective too.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. And are there can you suggest any movies, if a parent wants to either watch with their teen and, connect around, maybe, I don't know if it's something around the history of the LGBTQ movement or do you have any movie suggestions?
I think there are some great films and possibilities on the GLSEN website, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. Their website has materials for school teachers, like curriculum and those kinds of resources, and I think those might be really helpful to parents as well, if you want to read a book together with your child or watch a movie.
Yeah, okay, good.
And I believe their resources are also broken down in terms of like age range or developmental levels. So it's really great you can sort of fine tune it depending on how old your child is.
Gotcha. Okay, that's great. We'll put that link then there for sure. Okay. Oh, hey, one thing that I kind of skipped over before, but I just wanted to ask quickly. Are there any ways that the LGBTQ community has developed over time to deal with grief? That might be maybe parents would want to know about, plug their kids into.
Well, here at HMI, we've been working on how do we teach LGBT youth who access our programs here as members, how do we teach them about LGBT history and how the community has been resilient around processing loss and dealing with adversity and even, processing grief. And so we really think, the community has had a long history of having to deal with, the AIDS epidemic and the suicide epidemic and deaths of folks due to hate crimes, and that there's lots of ways that the community has developed that sort of turns grief into activism, turns grief into sort of community solidarity and ways of memorializing people. I think of the AIDS Memorial Quilt as a beautiful way that the community came together to say our lives matter and create forward action, together. And then, in some ways, I think about the Pride celebrations that happen every June where we commemorate the Stonewall uprising as also ways that the community says, we're here, we matter, and we can celebrate our existence and our, the beautiful parts about our community, even in the face of hate, of loss, of, things that, would otherwise sort of make life unbearable. The queer community has managed to stay alive, stay colorful, and stay connected in spite of those things.
And I think also that often means celebrating who we are and finding spaces for celebration within our community, that even as we are mourning and holding on to members of our community that we have lost, that we all are also, that celebrating yourself and, like Bridget said, your strength and your resilience, to be able to still love yourself despite all of these additional challenges you may face, that's really a beautiful thing. And one of the reasons why I think it's very helpful for young people to be able to connect with other members of the LGBTQ community and support each other as part of that process. And also to have parent allies as part of that as well, marching alongside us, celebrating with us alongside us, that's also very important.
And it sounds like this brings it back to that horizontal, I forget what you called it, the horizontal heritage?
Identity.
Yeah,
horizontal identity, yeah.
That the parent then helping the parent and child together, learning that sense of history that maybe they don't already know, and kind of plugging in that broader way, sounds like would be really important and helpful.
Yeah.
Hey, so we're almost out of time here. I think there's so much more we could talk about, but let me just ask one last question to each of you here. If you could say one thing to widowed parents about supporting their LGBTQ teenagers, what would it be? And Bridget, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I would say, I think just like your child needs to be with other teenagers who've experienced, parental loss, family, a death in the family, that your LGBTQ teenager needs to find other LGBTQ teenagers. And that connection is the thing that's going to not just get them through, but make them whole.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And Lizzie?
I guess I would say, similar to the grief process around losing a parent, that one of the best things that widowed parents can do is to listen to their kids and listen to what their kids are telling them in terms of what they need, who they are, and when your child is telling you who they are, to believe them and to ask how you can support them in that process.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I think that's a great place to end. So my guests today are Bridget Hughes and Lizzie McAdam from the Hetrick-Martin Institute in New York City. And so, Bridget, I'll ask you, where can listeners find the Hetrick-Martin Institute if they'd like to learn more about your work?
We are at www.hmi.org. And if there's folks want to email a question, you can email us at info@hmi.org. Okay.
All right. Fantastic. Well, Lizzie and Bridget, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Bridget Hughes and Lizzie McAdam as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 31. And hey, I hope to see you on the next podcast discussion group on Sunday, August 4th, where we will discuss this episode as well as other recent episodes. I'll be sending out questions ahead of time. If there's something you'd like to discuss, just drop me a note at jenny@jennylisk.com and let me know what's on your mind. Sign up at widowedparentpodcast.com if you haven't already, and look for the blue button that says Join Discussion Group. Thanks for listening. Until next week, keep smiling.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.